In the news tonight, His Majesty the King opens the Nablus Mosque in Al Yasmin neighborhood in Amman and joins worshippers in Friday prayer. The Russian president signs a law completing the annexation of Crimea, and the EU signs a political deal with Ukraine in a show of support and warns Russia of imposing wider sanctions. And Turkey bans Twitter ahead of bitterly contested elections, sparking international condemnation, public anger, and triggering a rift between the president and the prime minister. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. His Majesty King Abdullah opened the Nablus Mosque in Al Yasmin neighborhood in Amman and joined worshippers in performing Friday prayers. The King and the worshippers listened to the Friday sermon, which was delivered by Chief Justice Ahmed Hlayel and focused on the role of mosques as places of worship and prayer. The three-story mosque was built by a local donor at a total cost of 2 million Jordanian dinars. It was constructed on a 1,500 square meter plot of land and can hold about 2,000 worshippers. The mosque includes prayer spaces for both men and women and a house for teaching Quran. Israel said its forces have discovered a tunnel dug by Palestinian activists from the Gaza Strip, which runs hundreds of meters beneath its territory. An Israeli military spokesman said it was the longest such tunnel it has ever uncovered, claiming it was built to carry out attacks on Israelis. The Israeli military said that last year it had discovered 3 such tunnels. Hamas, however, said claims by Israel that it foiled a big operation and discovered a tunnel were not true, adding that the tunnel was destroyed naturally. A UN human rights investigator accused Israel of ethnic cleansing in pushing Palestinians out of occupied East Jerusalem and cast doubt that the Israeli government could accept a Palestinian state in the current climate. UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the Palestinian territories, Richard Falk, said Israeli policies bore unacceptable characteristics of colonialism, apartheid, and ethnic cleansing. Speaking at a press conference in Geneva, Falk said that more than 11,000 Palestinians had lost their right to live in Jerusalem since 1996 due to Israel imposing residency laws favoring Jews and revoking Palestinian residence permits. He accused Israel of a systematic and continued effort to change the ethnic composition of East Jerusalem. In a report last month, Falk said Israeli policies in the West Bank appear to amount to apartheid and segregation, with a de facto annexation of parts of the territory, denying the Palestinian right to self-determination. Israel has neither responded to Falk's report nor today's remarks. And over to Syria, where fighting between government forces and rebels continued in several places across the country. Rebels were reported to have taken a government-controlled border post with Turkey in the port city of Latakia. In a video posted on the internet, rebels claimed to have taken control of the Kasab border with Turkey, while in the Daria district of Damascus, a video posted purported to capture the moment when a bomb by government forces was dropped. The rebels also targeted government facilities in Daraa province, launching a rocket attack on what is said to be Sawami checkpoint and barracks of government troops. And gun battles have erupted again in the northern Lebanese city of Tripoli, with gunmen firing automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. At least 7 people were killed in the intense fighting between supporters and opponents of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. 4 civilians, including an elderly man, were shot dead by snipers, while 11 others were injured. 3 people who were wounded in earlier clashes died, including 2 gunmen who were hit in overnight clashes between fighters from the Sunni district of Bab al-Tabbani and the Alawite neighborhood of Jabal Muhsin. For decades, there has been sectarian violence in Tripoli, but it has worsened after the Syria conflict. The United Nations has drawn on the bustling energy of New York City and Tokyo to spotlight the ongoing struggle of besieged civilians trapped amid Syria's civil war. The massive international social media campaign is led by the UN Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA. In Times Square in New York, jaws dropped as images of thousands of Palestinian refugees waiting amid the rubble of crumbling buildings to receive food aid in Yarmouk camp in the suburbs of Damascus were shown. The event was part of a global call for an immediate ceasefire and lifting of the siege of civilian areas in Syria, as well as supporting Palestinian refugees who have been living in Syria and who have now been made refugees again. The campaign is backed by over 30 celebrities, including director Alfonso Cuarón, Sting and his wife Trudy Styler, singer Annie Lennox, and actress Emma Thompson. Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a law completing Russia's annexation of Crimea and laughing off Western sanctions against Russia. The EU and the United States imposed sanctions on a number of individuals and a bank over the Crimea crisis and warned of wider measures to come unless there's a peaceful resolution. Yet Putin appeared insouciant in the face of the Western maneuvers. Here's more.
International tensions over Ukraine ratcheted up another notch. Despite Western protests and sanctions against Russia, President Vladimir Putin signed a law on ratification of a treaty making Crimea part of Russia, as well as legislation creating two new Russian administrative districts, Crimea and the port city of Sevastopol, where Moscow kept part of its Black Sea fleet.
We have a lot of work to do to complete the adaptation of Crimea, its introduction to the legal system of the Russian Federation. I ask the deputies of both houses of the parliament to get actively involved in this work and to do whatever it takes to make this process painless and beneficial for both Russia and Crimea.
British Prime Minister David Cameron warned the Kremlin that Russia would face far-reaching consequences if it sent troops into Ukraine after a referendum in Crimea, which he said has been carried out under the barrel of a Kalashnikov.
For instance, Russian troops were to go into the east of the country. The Russians need to know that would trigger, as it says in the conclusions that we've published, far-reaching consequences in a broad range of economic areas. And that's why, for the first time, these conclusions talk about the European Council asking the Commission and Member States to prepare possible targeted measures.
United Nations Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon called on Moscow and Kiev to begin a dialogue after meeting with the acting Ukrainian President Oleksandr Toshinov.
What is important at this time is that, as I have been repeatedly saying, the most important thing is that the Ukraine and Russian authorities should sit down together and engage in direct and constructive dialogue.
And while Russian troops completed the takeover of Ukrainian Perevolnoye army base southeast of Simferopol and raised the Russian flag in the capital Kiev, pro-European activists raised the European Union flag as the city's residents considered a future with the EU, but without Crimea. And in Brussels, EU leaders underlined their support for Ukraine's new leadership by signing a political agreement with interim Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk and promising financial aid as soon as Kiev reaches a deal with the International Monetary Fund. It was the agreement that ousted President Viktor Yanukovych after his refusal to sign it with the EU. The EU leaders also agreed to try to reduce energy dependence on Russia and to add 12 names to Russia's sanctions list, warning Moscow targeted economic sanctions will be next. The signing of the EU-Ukraine deal could risk further angering Moscow, which sees a European-leaning Ukraine as a threat. Loy Balkar for the News at 10.
Turkey's courts blocked access to Twitter after Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan's defiant vow ahead of March 30 elections to wipe out the social media service, saying he did not care what the international community had to say about it. Twitter users called the ban a digital coup, and Turkish President Abdullah Gül set himself publicly at odds with Erdogan, saying it was unacceptable to impose complete bans on social media platforms. Posting on his own Twitter page, Gül said only individual internet pages should be blocked if a court ruled that an individual's privacy had been violated. Here's a story.
At his rallies, they're still cheering. But Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan knows his popularity is waning, blocking Twitter a last-ditch attempt to salvage support before next week's crucial local elections.
Twitter, Schmitter. We have a court order now. We'll wipe out all of these. The international community can say this, can say that. I don't care at all. Everyone will see how powerful the Republic of Turkey is.
The move comes after details of a prosecutor's report into bribery were leaked on the website, the latest episode in a long-running corruption scandal that just won't go away. Turkey's president has called the ban unacceptable. Many voters are similarly unimpressed.
He thinks we cannot criticise him if he shuts down Twitter, but our struggle will continue. Nothing will change despite the ban.
In many ways, the damage has already been done. Violent protests are becoming an increasingly regular feature and a symptom of the country's mounting economic woes. Rising unemployment, rapidly slowing growth and a currency in freefall. What a difference a year makes. A member of the new MINT acronym of investor hotspots, Turkey was supposedly the economic equivalent of a diamond in the rough. The diamond is losing its luster.
I personally feel that Erdogan has lost the plot. I think, as political leaders, after they've been in power for a very long time, often do. You know, what's just happened with Twitter doesn't help matters.
After 11 years in power, Erdogan is facing one of his toughest tests yet. The elections being seen as a litmus test of how far the corruption scandal has damaged his party. Anything other than a comprehensive victory could spell the beginning of the end.
The international team searching for missing Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 in the remote southern Indian Ocean failed to turn up anything. Aircraft and ships have also renewed a search in the Andaman Sea between India and Thailand, going over areas that have already been exhaustively swept in an attempt to find some clue to unlock one of the biggest mysteries in modern aviation. Australian authorities confirmed there were no sightings of any suspected debris, but said the search was still ongoing. The Boeing 777 went missing almost 2 weeks ago off the Malaysian coast with 239 passengers and crew on board. Britain plans to replace its £1 coin with a new version modelled on the country's historic 3-penny piece. The new pound's proposed 12-sided shape, composed of 2 different coloured metals, will help with efforts to crack down on fake currency, the Finance Ministry said. British Finance Minister George Osborne will formally notify Britain's lawmakers of the proposed new coin to be introduced in 2017 as part of his annual budget announcement in Parliament. The current pound has become vulnerable to sophisticated counterfeiters, with about 3% of all £1 coins, or 45 million, believed to be forgeries. The new coin will be armed with new integrated secure identification system technology developed by the Royal Mint, the maker of Britain's coins. Some 2,600 children in Greece formed a human chain around the famous Parthenon temple in the Acropolis in Athens as a symbol against racism. Today is the United Nations International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Racism has become an issue in Greece in the last 2 years, following a series of racist attacks on immigrants believed to be carried out by right-wing extremists. The thousands of children who came with their teachers from schools in the Greek capital held up placards reading, "I embrace the Acropolis, I embrace humanity," and sang as tourists looked on. The event was organized by the Greek Secretariat for Human Rights. It is Mother's Day today and the first day of spring. Much of Europe marked the first day of spring, drenched in glorious sunshine and warm temperatures. In Rome, many could be seen lunching on restaurants' outdoor terraces, and an order of Italian gelato ice cream was a must. The scenes were similar in the Greek capital Athens, where locals and tourists enjoyed the warm weather. And in Istanbul, people took to the banks of the Bosphorus to spend the spring afternoon by the water. We begin with local sports, where Al-Wahdat beat Al-Faisali 2-0 to take top spot in the Jordan Professional League. It was Al-Faisali's Yusuf Al-Alousi who scored an own goal in the 11th minute of the match to give Al-Wahdat the lead. And in minute 92, Amr Deep scored a penalty kick to give Al-Wahdat the win. Tension broke out between the two teams shortly after the goal, which resulted in the referee handing out a red card to Bassem Fathi of Al-Wahdat and Sharif Adnan from Al-Faisali. Al-Wahdat are top of the league, with Al-Faisali in second and Al Jazeera in third place.
هدف التعزيز عن طريق اللاعب عامر ديب. عامر ديب يحسم الأمور تماما.
And to the Champions League quarter-final draw that took place earlier today in Lyon, Switzerland. Real Madrid were given a chance to avenge last season's Champions League semi-final defeat by Borussia Dortmund when the teams were drawn against each other. Tie holders Bayern Munich were paired with Manchester United, a meeting that will inevitably spark memories of their 1999 final when United scored 2 goals and won 2-1. Paris Saint-Germain faced Chelsea, and the remaining tie is an all-Spanish affair between Barcelona and Atletico Madrid, the team's first ever meeting in European competition. The matches will be played on April 1st and 2nd and the 8th and 9th.
Chelsea FC.
They will play Chelsea.
And in the Europa League draw, favourites Juventus were handed a difficult tie against Olympique Lyon. Benfica were drawn against Dutch club AZ Alkmaar, while their compatriots Porto faced Sevilla. In other tie, Basel meet Valencia. The games will be played on April 3rd and the 9th.
Benfica from Portugal.
Olympique Lyonnais.
Olympique Lyonnais, quarterfinal.
And finally, a quick look at the weather. Relatively cold night with northeasterly moderate winds. As for tomorrow, fair weather is expected as temperatures slightly rise, while winds will be southeasterly moderate. The Gulf of Aqaba can expect pleasant conditions tonight and relatively hot tomorrow, while winds will be mild, picking up at times, and the seas slightly choppy. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, a reminder of the day's top stories. His Majesty the King opens the Nablus Mosque in Al Yasmin neighborhood in Amman and joins worshippers in Friday prayers. The Russian president signs a law completing the annexation of Crimea, and the EU signs a political deal with Ukraine in a show of support and warns Russia of imposing wider sanctions. And Turkey bans Twitter ahead of bitterly contested elections, sparking international condemnation, public anger, and triggering a rift between the president and prime minister. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tuqan. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow.